When you're walking, standing, or bending down, do you sometimes get a pop or a crack through your knee? Although this is typically more of an annoyance than it is anything else, some people do report pain or discomfort when they do get that popping or grinding. And if that's the case for you, or you just want to resolve this annoying sound that you're getting through your knee, this video will be for you. So before we jump into the exercises to resolve some of this cracking, popping, or grinding through the knee, let's first understand some of the principles as to why this might be happening in the first place. And one of the more common themes that you're going to hear as it relates to the knee popping as it goes through this deeper state of flexion is usually a result of a ligament or a tendon lacking proper tracking as you're going through that pattern. And although that is probably what is occurring at a joint level, I think an important question that we have to ask ourselves is, why is that happening in the first place? And I think we can look at the musculature around the knee from a more local perspective to begin with, as to how that is creating stability with the knee laterally, as to how it goes through flexion and extension. But also, something that I don't often hear is the relationship between how this musculature kind of synergizes with the pelvis, and how we can use the hips kind of more as a primary stabilizer for movement that we're going through, or more as a primary mover if I'm going to be going down to pick something up, compared to just loading my knee the whole time. So if you're an athlete and you're finding that this is something that's happening, you could be going maybe too much into knee flexion if you do a lot of jumping, as an example. If you're someone who has just gone through the past couple decades, this is something you've just kind of gotten used to, then it could be that when you go to pick something up and you're just going through your day-to-day tasks, that you're going through it with a great deal of knee flexion without much awareness of the musculature in through your adductors, maybe in through your upper hamstrings and your glutes, and how these can all be contributing factors to help offload some of the pressure that could be going into the knee. So what we're going to be having a focus on as we get into the exercise portion of this is, how do we build some awareness and tension around these different muscles to help create stability for the knee, but also how can we begin to integrate that into common movement patterns that we'd find ourselves doing either in sport or just throughout the course of the day. So with some of the why out of the way, let's get into those exercises. So one of the more common themes that I see present itself as it relates to popping or cracking through the knee is typically a laxity of the knee. And this can show up as a hyperextension of the knee in a standing position, or maybe even through assessment, the kneecap is shifting a lot laterally. So one way in which we're going to begin to access more knee stability is by bringing some feedback into our hamstrings. We're going to be using a foam roller, but if you have a ball, or you can even go on a wall as well, anything that's going to allow you to get some feedback with your feet away from you, where we can get into just a slight bridge position. The foam roller is going to be nice because we're going to be doing a roll in and out, where we can get a both shortening and lengthening cycle of the hamstrings. So what this is going to look like is we're going to be coming onto our back. We're going to start with both legs on the foam roller. Try to limit how much you use your elbows here, but you certainly can use them for support. And what we're going to do is take our hips up. We're going to start with doing a pull in, and we're just going to come to the forefoot as we do that in an attempt to get a little bit of hamstring feedback. Now, once I feel like I have a little bit of tension through the hamstrings, we're going to start to do a roll out until it gets to about our heels without the hips dropping in that process. And this is how we're going to start to get length, tension through the hamstrings. As we start to pull back in, this is where we are going to be getting more of that shortening or contracting of the hamstrings. And then we're not going to be going all the way to the point where, say, my knees would totally lock out here if I were to roll it all the way. We're just going to go to the point where I still feel as if the hamstrings are linked, but the knees themselves are in a soft bend. Again, limiting how much you're using the arms, keeping the hips level. And I would work through anywhere between about 12 to 14 reps here, trying to keep your glutes in this process relatively soft. They're gonna be active because you are in some level of hip extension, but the intention here is you're not squeezing them as hard as you can to keep this position. You're just trying to keep the hips elevated through some softness of the glutes, but really trying to keep the focus primarily through the hamstrings as you're working through it. So in our previous exercise, we were working on targeting the hamstrings in a little bit more of an isolated way in an attempt to hopefully feel where the hamstrings are on our body. I find that's often a muscle that is quite overlooked and neglected. So what we're gonna attempt to do here is grab yourself a yoga block and we're gonna reconnect to the hamstrings in a standing position. And we're also gonna try to find our inner thigh muscle, our adductor, which is another muscle that when I'm working with clients, they don't seem to even be aware of that is a part of their body. So if you're in that camp, it's no problems. We're gonna be trying to access that and hopefully provide a little bit more stability into your pelvis. So grab a yoga block. You can use a book, a water bottle also works here. What we're gonna do is we're gonna come up to the wall like so, and we're gonna be in a split stance position. So I'm gonna be like this with my legs, and you're gonna be mindful that with your lead leg knee. So if you look at my right knee, I'm not gonna allow it to go into this hyperextension, which is what I was speaking to in that exercise prior. This is a place where people who deal with a lot of knee popping and grinding tend to find themselves in a standing position. So we're gonna be mindful that we're not feeding that. And what I'm gonna encourage is that soft bend in the knee, very similar to what we were mimicking on the floor. So grab the tool of your choice, come to your split stance position. If you need something to hang on to in front, you can stabilize yourself as needed. We're gonna create some pressure into the tool of our choice, into the wall. Think about almost hugging your upper inner thigh. You're giving it just a little bit of a squeeze, and you're trying to just feel some sensation coming into there. Once you feel like you have that, if you don't, not a huge deal either. We're gonna start to go into a little bit of a hip rotation back. So my right hip is rotating back. And now what we're gonna start to do is fall forward, trying to link the length of the hamstring with a little bit of that adductor feedback. And you can notice here that my center of mass is quite far forward. I'm trying to really get on top of this lead leg. We'll do a brief pause at the bottom, and it's gonna be a slow press standing up. And I want you to notice my right knee is staying more or less where it is. We're trying to get used to the hips tracking on top of the knee rather than me just going into this knee extension. What's nice with the tool here is it kind of keeps the knee more or less locked in, and we can really work on this relationship between bridging how the tension through my pelvis and my knee can work as a unit to take my whole body through extension. One thing to be mindful of here that's quite important is that as you're taking the hips back and your center of mass is coming forward, be mindful that your lower back here is staying more or less neutral or flat, we'll say, just to keep it simple. Try not to have that rounding out or your whole body starting to round out. What I find sometimes when I'm working with people is they're kind of like caving over themselves here and they're just kind of hanging on. Again, if you need some dowels or something to support yourself to keep that separation, use that as needed. The idea here is we keep weight on that lead leg. We keep the lumbar neutral. We're sitting back into the hips through a hinging motion. I'm feeling the tension build. I'm sustaining that as I'm coming back up. And we're gonna work through anywhere between about 8 to 12 reps here. You can see the tempo I'm going at is about 3 to 4 seconds down, brief pause, smooth press through the floor, 3 to 4 seconds coming back up. I keep that weight on the lead leg, and I can certainly sense that this right leg has a lot of feedback into it, which is going to prime it for the exercise that we have ahead. So we've spent some time on connecting to the hamstrings, both on the floor and through our hinge position, where we were also trying to access some of the adductors all in a attempt to not only work the muscles and the stabilizers around the knee, but also targeting some of the bigger muscles around the hips, so those can start to contribute to our movement. Speaking of movement, that is what we're gonna get into now. So you can grab yourself a basketball, a soccer ball, and we're gonna work a rotational lunge. So we're gonna start from this bilateral stance with my feet just side by side. And we're gonna work one side at a time. So we're gonna start with the ball. If I'm gonna be stepping forward with my right leg, I'm gonna start with the ball at about my left hip. And then what I'm gonna do is take a step forward and I'm gonna rotate over this lead leg, being mindful that the path that my knee is tracking on is staying somewhat forward and back. I'm trying not to have it go into kind of this lateral plane of motion, which can start to create issues. So just be mindful that when you do take that step forward, that this knee is staying pointed forward. If you're struggling on the step and you just notice that your knee is wanting to do something like that, then what I would suggest is just staying in this position, and you can just work a rotation with a little bit of a lunge of your hips kind of sitting back. We're gonna try to work through this a little bit more dynamically, and this is what you could progress into. So starting from this stance, I take my step and I come back. And I'm just allowing my body to more or less rotate over this lead leg, and I'm trying to be relatively soft on the landing of this lead leg. So I'm letting myself and my weight kind of come down, and I'm thinking of it being quite reflexive or almost like a spring from the floor. So I can kind of just press away from that, trying to feel how all the musculature that we were just working on in a little bit more of a isolated format can start to apply here more dynamically. I do about 12 to 14 reps on the one side, and then you can switch that up. See if you notice when you're going side to side, if there's any difference there with how the leg feels, how the hip feels, or maybe just how the body is kind of trying to organize itself around that movement. It's not necessarily a bad thing that it feels different. It's probably not going to feel perfectly symmetrical, and that's not the intention here. The intention is that as we're going through this, can we just be aware of what maybe feels a little bit different, what feels better, what feels like allows me to get into that movement and go through that movement with a little bit more flow. If you can do that over time, you're going to be conditioning the system, and when you do go to do these types of movements more dynamically and unconsciously, you'll have things lined up and integrated in a way that will hopefully offload some of that popping and cracking tendency through the knees. So that is going to wrap this week's video on hopefully how to resolve some popping or grinding, or maybe just some weird annoying sounds that are coming out of your knee, whatever those may be. So I hope you learned a few new things as it relates to the knee, also the knee and hip connection. That is a really important connection as it relates to movement, sport, as well as if you're trying to develop any type of strength. Having that connection is going to just allow for more musculature to come online. And as a result of that, you're just gonna get more gains. And who doesn't like that? So spend some time in those exercises, develop that relationship with your body through the sensation, take some time with yourself and your body, have patience, really try to get yourself into those positions in a way where you're experiencing tension, in a way that is manageable and that you have capacity for. There's no need to push to extremes, especially in something like this. And as always, if you did find this helpful or useful, you can subscribe, you can like. If you got any questions, you can drop them down in the comments below. And I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.